Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we dig into all sorts of sources, ancient philosophy, classical ethics, even military strategy and modern business thinking.
Yeah, we sift through it all.
And we're looking for those core blueprints, the principles for, effective action.
Exactly.
Today, we're trying to pull out those essential traits you need for success, whether you're handling a major crisis or just trying to lead a life with a bit more purpose.
And our mission really is to connect that timeless wisdom with practical, real-world strategy. It's fascinating how the sources keep pointing to this three-part connection.
Three parts.
Yeah, you've got internal mastery, then ethical character, and finally strategic thinking. Seems like genuine effectiveness depends on linking all three. We're looking for that common thread, how you move from governing yourself to navigating all the complexity out there.
Okay, let's get into that. It sounds like we have to start with the trickiest part first. Inner mastery, self-governance.
It really is the foundation. Before you manage a company, a project, even just a relationship, you've got to manage yourself.
And we're starting way back, deep inside the Bhagavad Gita. It sets up this really profound contrast, doesn't it, between the spiritual self and the everyday world.
It really does. The Gita is pretty direct about this distinction. It talks about the sanatana, that which is eternal, spiritual, constant.
Okay.
And it contrasts that sharply with the temporary material world. And this material world, it has this fundamental law, an inescapable cycle.
What's the cycle?
Everything comes into being, it stays for a bit, maybe produces some byproducts, then it starts to dwindle, and finally, poof, it vanishes.
Huh. So everything, like our bodies, projects, companies.
Everything material. That's the physical law governing it all. Nothing temporary lasts.
So what's the takeaway for us then? The Gita mentions Sanatana Dharma. What's that about?
That's about reviving the eternal nature, the eternal occupation of the self. And this leads the text to be, well, surprisingly critical of people who get obsessed with just the outcomes, the material results of their work.
Critical how?
Well, it says that those who desire fruitive results, focused only on the external reward, the phalahitava, they're called kapanic.
Kapana. What does that mean?
It translates directly as misers.
Misers. Why misers? That sounds harsh.
Because they're spending their precious, eternal spiritual energy on temporary gains, on outcomes that are guaranteed to disappear eventually. It seems a poor investment, spiritually speaking.
That's wow. Okay, wait. So is the Gita saying ambition itself is bad? Or is it the attachment to the outcome? Because, modern thinking pushes us so hard towards goals. Is that the problem?
It's definitely the latter. The attachment is the issue. That's the crucial difference. Intelligent action, what the text calls Buddha Yoga, means keeping all those abominable activities, actions driven purely by attachment to results, far away, by acting without being attached to those temporary results. The idea is that you achieve intelligence in action through a kind of detachment. In this context, it's often called consciousness, but the core philosophy is maintaining your inner balance, your equanimity, whether you succeed or fail externally.
So if you attach your eternal self to things that vanish.
That's the formula for suffering. That's why it's misery.
So achieving that perfect peace, the shantam atigachati the text talks about, it's purely an internal thing, regardless of what's happening outside.
Precisely. It's an internal victory. That peace comes to someone who lives nispa.
Which means?
Living desireless. Giving up the constant craving for material sense gratification. And this is huge for leadership. Operating without that possessiveness, that sense of this is mine, mama, and without false ego, nirakkara.
So you focus just on the work itself, knowing the results come and go.
Exactly. You do the best work you can, aligned with your duty or purpose, and let the results fall where they may. But this immediately raises a big question for us, right? How do we even tell what's temporary and what's eternal, given how, flawed our own perception is?
Oh, yeah, that's a great link, because Western thought and modern psychology really hammer this point home, too, how fragile our perception is. Ralph Waldo Emerson, he made this distinction between voluntary acts and involuntary perceptions.
Right. Emerson argued that we owe perfect faith to those involuntary perceptions, things we just see or realize, not things we choose to believe.
Why?
Because he saw perception itself as fatal, not whimsical, like it's a fixed fact, almost like the sun. If you perceive something truly profound, eventually everyone will see it too, even if you're the first. It's our closest link to a reality outside our own opinions.
But then you get to modern science, especially cognitive science, and it tells a different story, doesn't it? Our perception is, it's messy. Which brings us straight to Daniel Kahneman and his two systems.
System 1 and System 2.
Yeah.
System 1 is that fast, intuitive, automatic thinking. It jumps to conclusions, suppresses doubt. Kahneman calls it the secret author of many choices and judgments.
And the problem is...
And the problem is it craves coherence. It makes reality seem much simpler and more consistent than it actually is. It connects dots that aren't really connected, smooths over ambiguity. It gives us a story that feels right, but might be totally wrong.
And when emotions get involved, it gets even worse, right? The brain actually has shortcuts.
Exactly. The amygdala, the brain's emotional center, can basically hijack the whole process. It uses an emergency route.
Sipping the thinking part.
Pretty much. It bypasses the neocortex, the slower, more rational part of the brain. Daniel Goleman wrote a lot about this with emotional intelligence. When things get heated or we feel threatened, the emotional brain just takes over. Our ingrained habits, our practiced responses, they just fire automatically.
For better or worse.
For better or worse. Which makes our everyday experience feel real, but it's often just a persuasive illusion.
Like a magic trick? Or even just driving. Your brain fills in so much missing information constantly.
And we're not aware of the filling in part. We just experience the final picture, which feels totally complete and accurate, even though it's based on a tiny sliver of data.
Creating this illusion that we have the full picture.
Right. And that hidden processing fuels things like confirmation bias, where we automatically look for and accept info that fits our existing beliefs, our stories, and ignore anything that contradicts them.
Ugh, yeah, we all do that.
Overcoming that takes exactly what the Gita was talking about, serious mental discipline, which brings us back nicely to the classical virtues.
Like Cicero, writing centuries after the Gita. But his advice sounds remarkably similar, just maybe more practical for, like, Roman senators.
Very practical. He stresses guarding against violent emotions, anger, fear, despondency. The key, he says, is making sure our impulse, that urge to act, is always obedient to reason, the part of us that deliberately seeks truth.
Keeping things in balance.
Exactly. Maintaining the mind's natural equipoise. And that internal discipline connects directly to a very modern idea, anti-fragility.
Nassim Taleb's concept.
Yep. And Taleb explicitly points back to Seneca and the Stoics, like Cicero. He shows how that ancient discipline is basically the foundation for benefiting from chaos and disorder.
Right. Anti-fragile isn't just being tough or robust, is it? It's actually getting better from shocks.
Precisely. Robustness resists shocks and stays the same. Anti-fragility feeds on shocks. Anti-fragile things, systems, people, ideas gain from volatility, errors, randomness, stressors.
How? Why?
Because they have this fundamental asymmetry. When a shock hits, they have more potential upside than downside. Think about it in practice.
Okay.
An anti-fragile company doesn't just survive mistakes. It has systems error logs, mandatory postmortems, rapid redesigns, specifically to learn and get stronger from every single failure or unexpected event.
So adopting that Ciceronian discipline, making impulse, obey reason, makes your inner self anti-fragile.
That's the idea. You position yourself internally so that when the messy, temporary external world inevitably throws curveballs, you actually benefit, or at least learn significantly, instead of just getting knocked down by them.
That makes a lot of sense. Your internal state determines how you react to the outside chaos. So if you have that inner mastery, seeing through illusion, controlling impulses, acting without clinging to outcomes, then you're actually ready to engage effectively with the world.
Exactly. Which brings us logically to our next big theme.
Yeah.
The character needed for that effective action, especially when it comes to leadership and building trust.
Okay, character and trust. Where do we look for that?
Let's go back to Cicero again. He defines the very glue of human society as resting on two pillars, justice and beneficence.
Justice and doing good.
Pretty much. Justice means, first, do no harm unless you're provoked by injustice. And second, respect property, common is common, private is private. Basic stuff. But beneath all that, the absolute foundation
What is it?
is good faith, sides, steadfastness and truth in promises, in agreements, in your word.
So just being honest and reliable. Cicero sees that as the absolute core.
Absolutely essential. He doesn't see it as just a nice personality trait. He argues its power is so fundamental that even criminal organizations can't function without it.
Wait, even criminals need good faith.
Think about it. A band of robbers. The captain has to divide the loot fairly, right? If he breaks faith with the crew...
They'll kill him or leave him.
Exactly. So if even criminals need basic fairness and reliability to hold their little group together, imagine how vital it is for building a lasting, legitimate society or company. Good faith is the non-negotiable lubricant for any kind of collective human effort.
Okay, so if even thieves need fairness, a real leader needs to embody that on a much bigger, more positive scale.
Precisely. And we see a great example of this in Xenophon's account of Cyrus the Persian.
Cyrus the Great.
Right. He's presented as a model leader who really focused on character, not just conquest. He actually earned the title father from the people he conquered because he made a conscious decision to be a benefactor on a massive scale. He focused relentlessly on courtesy, on caring for his subjects, on justice. He wasn't just acting like a robber chief, taking what he wanted.
And that paid off strategically.
Hugely. His generosity and fairness built such deep trust that people were eager to help him, to bring him information. This led to that famous intelligence network, the King's Eyes and King's Ears. People served him willingly because they trusted his character and knew he was genuinely trying to benefit them, not just himself. That trust was earned day in, day out.
This connects really well to how that inner self-mastery we talked about translates into actual relationships. Stephen Covey talks about this, right? Private victory before public victory.
Absolutely. Covey is crystal clear. Achieving independence, what he calls the private victory, is the essential first step. That's about mastering yourself, your integrity, your values, acting proactively, not reactively. It echoes everything we discussed from the Gita and Cicero.
And only then can you achieve the public victory.
Right. Interdependence, building rich, effective, lasting relationships and collaborations isn't something that just happens. It's a deliberate choice. And it's a choice only truly independent people with that solid inner foundation, can make effectively.
Because if you lack that internal core,
when things get tough, when disagreements arise, your lack of character, your neediness, your reactivity, it will inevitably undermine the relationship. You can't build strong external connections on a weak internal foundation.
So what's key to making that interdependence work? Covey mentions maturity.
Yes, and he has a very specific definition. Maturity isn't just about age. It's the balance between courage and consideration.
Courage and consideration. Tell me more about that balance.
It's a really practical way to think about interaction. A mature person has the courage to state their convictions clearly, to express their feelings and needs, to stand up for what they believe in.
Okay, the courage part.
But crucially, they do it while also having genuine consideration for the other person's feelings, their perspective, their convictions. They hold both, especially when the stakes are high and emotions could easily take over.
And if that balance is off?
You get predictable problems. High courage, but low consideration. That's the aggressive, I win, you lose approach. It tramples relationships.
Right.
High consideration, but low courage. That's the you win, I lose doormat. You can't express your own needs. You get resentful. Nothing really gets resolved productively. You sacrifice yourself.
And that imbalance, that lack of maturity leads straight into the kind of problems people like Dalio talk about in organizations, right? The barriers to working together well.
Exactly. Dalio points to two big internal roadblocks.
Yeah.
The ego barrier and the blind spot barrier.
Ego and blind spots, how do they stop collaboration?
The ego barrier is that deep-seated need to be right, to look good. It makes it incredibly hard to acknowledge your own mistakes or weaknesses. The blind spot barrier is the fact that we simply cannot see ourselves objectively. We all have weaknesses or ways of thinking we're unaware of. Both barriers prevent us from seeing reality clearly, especially about ourselves.
And we assume our way of seeing things is the only way or the right way.
Precisely. We forget that our personal models, how we think work should be done, how family life should run, how relationships function, are unique and shaped by our own limited experiences. They are just models, not the absolute truth.
I bet creative fields really struggle with this. Like Pixar, I remember reading they stress this.
They absolutely do. Places like Pixar know that if you don't actively create an environment where people feel safe to voice different perspectives, where you honor the fact that others see the world and the project differently, those differences will just cause friction and undermine the creative process. You have to deliberately invite challenges to your own mental models. The ego hates that, but it's essential.
So that maturity, that character, has to show up in how we actually communicate, especially when things get sensitive.
Definitely. When the stakes are high, giving tough feedback, disagreeing with the boss, holding a teammate accountable, you need specific skills to navigate that safely and effectively. That's where models like STATE come in.
STATE, that's an acronym, right? What does it stand for?
Yeah, 5 skills.
Yeah.
But the order is critical. First 3 are about what you say. Share facts, tell your story, ask for others' paths.
Share facts first. Why is that so important?
Because facts are the least controversial, least emotional starting point. Too often, we jump in with our story, our interpretation, our judgment, our feelings. You're always late, or I feel like you don't respect my time.
Yeah, that immediately puts people in the defensive.
Exactly. It's the most insulting and least influential way to start. But if you start with observable facts, the meeting was scheduled for 9:00 and you arrived at 9:14, or this report was due Tuesday and I received it Thursday, it creates common ground. It invites the other person to see the situation from the same starting point. Okay, facts first. Then, tell your story, ask for theirs. What about the last two? T and E.
Talk tentatively and encourage testing. These are about how you say it. They maintain safety.
Talk tentatively, meaning
Meaning, you phrase your story, your interpretation of the facts, as just that an interpretation, not a decree from on high. Use phrases like, based on those facts, the story I'm starting to tell myself is, or I'm wondering if, or perhaps the issue is. Don't state your conclusion as if it's undeniable fact.
lowers the defenses.
Right. And encourage testing is simply making it genuinely safe for them to disagree. You explicitly invite them to challenge you. What am I missing here? Do you see it differently? Please poke holes in my reasoning. You have to mean it too.
That sounds like it builds a lot of trust. Reminds me of Kim Scott's idea of radical candor.
Exactly. Radical candor is that sweet spot where you care personally and challenge directly.
You need both. Absolutely. If you challenge without caring, you're just being obnoxious or aggressive. If you care but don't challenge, that's what Scott calls ruinous empathy. You're not helping the person grow or fixing the problem because you're afraid to speak up. That combination of caring and challenging builds the trust you need for the really hard stuff,
Like accountability.
especially peer accountability. The sources point out this is often much harder than holding your direct reports accountable.
Why is that?
Because peers are supposed to be equals. Challenging an equal can feel like you're overstepping, like you're judging them unfairly. Patrick Lencioni emphasizes that for peer accountability to work at all, the team needs absolute clarity up front about what's expected.
Standards, deadlines, behaviors.
All of it. If those expectations weren't clearly defined, discussed, and agreed upon by everyone before an issue comes up, forget it. Even the most well-intentioned person will resist being called out by a peer. It's the leader's job to force that clarity early on.
Okay, this is a great transition. We've covered inner mastery and character for trust. Now, how does this all play out in the messy world of strategy and navigating complexity? Let's start with innovation and adapting.
Right. When you look at successful organizations dealing with complexity, there's a really interesting point about technology that comes up in the research, particularly Jim Collins's work.
What's the point?
Technology should be an accelerator of momentum you already have, not the creator of it. Good to great companies were very careful about this. They only pioneered a new technology if it fit squarely within their hedgehog concept.
Let's quickly remind ourselves, the hedgehog concept is that simple core strategy you find at the intersection of three things.
Exactly. What you can be the best in the world at, what drives your economic engine, and what you're deeply passionate about. If a technology doesn't directly accelerate that core concept, Collins found, the great companies often ignored it, even if it was trendy. It was just a distraction.
That takes discipline. It also sounds like you need to avoid getting stuck. I'm thinking of Andy Grove's idea about strategic inflection points.
Yes, Grove warned about being stuck in your own past, right when the whole landscape is shifting under your feet due to technology or competition. Steve Jobs actually faced this exact problem at NXT.
Really? How so?
Well, Jobs was a genius who basically kicked off the PC revolution, but at NXT he was stubbornly clinging to his old vision, building these perfect, insanely great and expensive computers.
While the rest of the industry
Had moved on to commodity PCs, scaling up massively, what Grove called a 10x force. Jobs' own team saw it. They knew NXT needed to pivot to being just a software company, leveraging its great operating system. But Jobs was in denial. He fought it hard.
until he couldn't anymore.
Right. He eventually had to face reality, shut down the hardware side, lay people off, and accept the messy, less glorious path of being a software company. It took a painful dose of humility, showing even a visionary can be blinded by their past successes at those critical turning points.
That internal tension between the grand vision and the practical reality also shows up in organizations as feeding the beast, right?
Ah, yes, feeding the beast. That's the relentless pressure, especially in successful creative places, to keep producing output movies, products, designs driven by schedules and budgets, rather than by the actual readiness or strength of the creative ideas.
So success creates pressure for more success, but faster.
Pretty much. The manager's responsible for the beast, production, finance. They're usually very organized, very focused on hitting deadlines and budgets, and that's important. But if their urgency takes over completely,
It can crush the creative side.
it can easily derail the more time-consuming, less predictable work of developing great stories, refining designs, or achieving real innovation. The creative folks need space, and the production folks need predictability. It's a constant balancing act for leadership. You ignore that tension at your peril. It leads straight to burnout or mediocrity.
It sounds like similar principles apply even in the highest stakes environment, warfare. Thinking about complexity and risk from a military perspective, Clausewitz, for example.
Clausewitz, writing during the chaos of the Napoleonic Wars, was fascinated by the surprising effectiveness of less conventional forces. He analyzed things like the Spanish guerrilla war against Napoleon and the Prussian Landwehr, which was like a citizen militia.
What was his insight?
He saw that these decentralized popular forces, even without the discipline of a professional army, had huge advantages. Deep motivation, local knowledge, resilience. They could bog down a much larger, more centralized force. He actually called for a Spanish civil war in Germany to resist the French, realizing that sometimes non-traditional distributed strategies are the only way to counter overwhelming conventional power.
And then you have Sun Tzu centuries earlier giving advice that sounds almost reckless.
You mean, place your army in deadly peril and it will survive. Plunge it into desperate straits and it will come off in safety.
Yeah, that. Put your back to the river? Sounds crazy.
It's not about being reckless. It's about extreme psychological strategy. It's about removing options to force commitment. Sun Tzu tells the story of General Han Sen doing exactly that, positioning his troops with a river right behind them.
So, no retreat possible.
None. Faced with certain death, if they retreated either by drowning or the enemy, the only option was to fight with absolute desperation. And they won. It eliminated the psychological possibility of giving up.
Okay, how does that translate back to, say, running a team or a company? You're not putting them by a literal river.
No, but it translates to the leader's willingness to make a decision, to commit to a course of action, even without perfect information or total agreement. Lencioni talks about this. A leader's biggest failure isn't necessarily making a wrong decision sometimes. It's demanding certainty or waiting for endless consensus. That's organizational paralysis. It's avoiding the desperate strait of having to choose.
So the leader has to be willing to act, even risk being wrong, rather than just waiting.
Yes. Demanding certainty is often just a sign of fear, and this connects to the need for foresight. A truly effective leader, the sources suggest, needs to operate on 2 levels of consciousness.
2 levels, what does that mean?
It means being fully grounded and responsible in the day-to-day reality, dealing with the facts on the ground, but at the same time, maintaining a kind of detachment, seeing current events within the long sweep of history, understanding the deeper patterns.
Why is that important?
That dual perspective allows you to anticipate shifts, to see possibilities or dangers before they become obvious. It lets you act proactively, based on insight, while you still have the freedom to maneuver before circumstances box you in and take away all your choices.
Okay, so inner mastery, character, strategy. The final piece seems to be understanding power itself, how it works, how to wield it, how to navigate it. Machiavelli comes to mind.
Machiavelli offers some stark but useful insights. His advice to a new prince about arming subjects is surprisingly relevant today, maybe thinking about things like employee empowerment or stock options.
He said a new prince should arm his subjects. That seems counterintuitive. Aren't you afraid they'll turn on you?
Machiavelli argues the opposite, especially in a newly taken state. He says, arm them, because those arms then become yours. You turn suspicious or neutral people into your own committed partisans. You give them agency and responsibility in your success.
And disarming them.
Disarming them sends a clear message of distrust. You're saying you think they're either cowards or disloyal. And that, Machiavelli warns, breeds immediate hatred and resentment. Empowerment builds loyalty. Distrust breeds opposition. It's a powerful lesson in how distributing agency creates commitment.
Wow, it's about earned trust again, but through empowerment.
Exactly. If people feel they have a stake, that they're trusted and necessary for the leader's security and success, they become active supporters. If they feel sidelined and distrusted, their energy goes elsewhere.
And when it comes to navigating the real-world structures of power, especially bureaucracy and politics, few examples are as stark as Robert Moses in New York.
Robert Moses, the power broker. A masterclass in understanding and manipulating the levers of power to achieve enormous, concrete results. Literally concrete. in this case.
He built so much bridges, parks, highways. How did he do it in a messy democracy?
By essentially short-circuiting the democratic process, he recognized that big public works in crowded cities often get bogged down for years, decades even, in political fights, community opposition, endless negotiation. Democracy struggles with massive, disruptive construction.
So what was his method?
He kept his projects largely under wraps, controlled by private authorities he created, until they were basically unstoppable. He'd have the site chosen, the plans finalized, the funding secured before it even went to public review or elected officials.
A fait accompli.
Precisely. By the time the public or the politicians could react, the project was so far along, so wrapped up, that changing it was physically or financially impossible. He even used design itself as power, like building parkway bridges with clearances too low for buses, deliberately excluding poorer people reliant on public transport from his beaches and parks. It shows how focused and sometimes ruthless power can reshape the physical and social landscape when it bypasses normal checks and balances.
Okay, so pulling all these threads together. We've gone from the inner world of the Gita and controlling the self, all the way to the external world of Machiavellian power plays and Robert Moses reshaping a city.
It's quite a journey, isn't it? From that deep internal mastery detachment, impulse control, clarity of perception through building character based on good faith and maturity, and finally applying that through sophisticated strategy, understanding risk, adaptation, and power dynamics. The path seems to be from the inside out. Internal alignment enables external effectiveness.
Which brings us to a final thought, something to leave our listeners chewing on. And it comes back to Emerson, reflecting on why we strive so hard for wealth and effectiveness in the first place.
Right. Emerson observed that fundamentally the drive for wealth, for power, for efficiency, it's really about trying to reduce the friction in life. We want to secure the good things, good conversation, strong character, beauty, comfort, security. Clean chimneys, warm rooms, as he put it. We work hard to remove the inconveniences that get in the way of those things.
Makes sense. We want things to be easier, smoother.
But here's the potential trap, the ridicule Emerson saw. And it loops right back to the Gita's warning about misers focusing only on temporary results.
What's the ridicule?
It's that in the intense, often all-consuming effort required to remove the friction, all the planning, the striving, the strategy, the sweat, the long hours needed to get the warm room, and the secure finances, we can completely lose sight of the original goal.
We forget why we wanted the warm room.
Exactly. We get so caught up in the process of removing inconvenience, so attached to the machinery of achieving efficiency or wealth, that the actual aims, the conversation, the character, the beauty, the connection, they just wither away. We arrive, as Emerson put it, nowhere.
Wow. All that effort to remove friction, and you end up with just less friction, but none of the things you wanted friction removed for.
That's the potential tragedy.
Yeah.
So the knowledge we've unearthed today, all this wisdom about effective action, it comes with a constant nagging question you have to keep asking yourself. Are my actions, my strategies, my efforts actually serving the deeper purpose? Or have I become so focused on optimizing the process and removing the friction that I've forgotten where I was trying to go in the first place?